Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls Podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life. Today, we have our honored guest, Dr. Matt Larson, as we discuss the AAO's role in advocacy and member support, his personal journey to becoming a practice owner with his wife, and direct-to-consumer treatment challenges. And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpadar.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. We're glad you're tuning in again. As part of our ongoing effort to keep you informed about the latest trends in the profession, we periodically share practice performance data from Gauge. So let's dive into some insights from January 2025. This month kicked off with a modest to weak start for the average practice. We saw a slight dip in new patient exams, down about 1.2%, while starts remained flat. It seems that a larger portion of starts is coming from pending patients rather than new patient exams or recalls. In the realm of brackets and wires, however, there was a bright spot with a growth of about 2.1% compared to the same month last year. In contrast, aligners starts took a hit, decreasing by about 6.4%, continuing a downward trend that started in 2024. On a more positive note, production rose by 2%, which aligns with an average 2% increase in case fees. It is worth noting, of course, that this data comes from around 900 practices actively using Gauge, which do tend to represent some higher producing private practices. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's guest, Dr. Matthew Larson, along with my co-hosts, Dr. Chris Teeters and Brian Anderson. How are y'all doing today, guys?
Feeling great.
Good. Good to have you, Matt.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Good. Welcome to the show, Matt. We really appreciate you being on here. For those of you who don't know Matt, he is, he holds quite a few positions in the orthodontic field. I'm going to let you give your little background here, Matthew. So let's talk about, where'd you go to school? Let's start off with that.
Yeah, so I originally thought I was going to break away from the family of orthodontists and do engineering, and went and did an engineering degree at University of Michigan. Loved some of the knowledge base, but didn't really enjoy when I started doing some internships and everything. And so found my way back into dentistry. Went back to Minnesota for that, and then probably chat about it a little bit more later. But my dad ended up taking over as chair and program director at Minnesota as I was there. And so it became a little bit, I think we would have managed it very well, but we were kind of concerned about if there would be some conflict there if I stayed at that program, and ended up going down to North Carolina for my residency, and really enjoyed residency down there and got a chance to learn a lot. And then met my wife down in residency. She was a resident at Temple at the time. We ended up getting married and opening a practice in Eau Claire, Wisconsin within the same month in 2012, and been working in private practice ever since.
Yeah, and now Matt, you also serve on a couple of committees for the AAO. I think that's where we first met, if I'm not mistaken, was through there. You're on the committee on technology. That's CTech. Committee on conferences. That's am I saying is it CCon? Yeah. Is that how you say that?
CCon, yep, that's CCon, it. Yep.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your journey there. How did you get involved with the AAO?
Yeah, it was one of those things that kind of the opportunity arose that people were just asking. There was a need for someone to be kind of more of a younger member on one of those committees, bringing a little insight, and happened to get the request since I was interested in some 3D printing and scanning technology back at that point. So I was very happy. I was only probably 3 years out of residency joining that committee, and was happy to serve on there for a full 8 years. So I rotated off that committee a few years back, and still miss a lot of the great orthodontists I met on that committee. Was one of the people that kind of helped get that Tech Select buying program together through the AAO. So if you guys are looking for any technology to bring to your practices, that's a great option with guaranteed best pricing for things, and help support our association at the same time. And then building connections along the way, kind of more opportunities came up. And so got the opportunity to transition from that into the newly developing Committee on Conferences to help plan the AAO meetings and select speakers for all the meetings. And so that's been fun because, as things often go where people have time in the profession, it used to be a lot easier for people who had gone through a whole career already and were older, tended to take on some of those roles. And there really has been a lot of initiative to try to bring new and younger members in, and a wide range of experiences, because we as an association are a pretty wide range of age, backgrounds, practice styles and modalities. We really try to strive to get a balance of that. And so thankfully I was lucky to be kind of the the younger private practice perspective for that for quite a while and really enjoyed my time. I'm past chair for the committee of conferences this year, so sadly rolling off of that one as well. And we'll see what's kind of next for me from there. But was pretty happy with things there. For those who don't know on the podcast, we did try to implement more open processes for speaker selection there. So now there's an open call for speakers that you can access to the AAO website.
That's great.
And it really helped open up to just better organization for the conference. Because I mean, as all of us have been there, it's a great meeting, but there is a lot going on. And so we kind of help try to break that down by having, we call it personas, the different styles of what you come there to learn towards. So, not only looking at like a scientific side of things for information, but also looking to, if you're looking just for clinical techniques or training, looking more innovative and current technology, looking for business management, or just looking for inspiration or professional development. And so there's different ways of looking through each of those. Obviously, the people applying and that we select for like the scientific advances are going to be a little bit different than other areas. So if you have a lot of scientific articles under your belt, great thing to look at doing the scientific advances lecture and great thing to attend while you're at the meeting. If you're looking at, business success, that's where we get sometimes, even consultants coming in or a lot of different ranges of members applying to just talk about how they run and what they do innovative in their practices. So.
Well, you guys are doing great work there. I think that, I've really enjoyed the AAO meetings ever since I graduated. I've been to most of them at this point. I do feel like everything evolves and you guys are doing your best to keep up with that pace. And personally, I'm impressed with what you're doing there.
I want to say something on that, Andy. I have no financial affiliation other than being an AAO member. I'm not paid to promote, the AAO. But I do want to give a word of gratitude. Of course, I know that we can always be critical. We can look at our best case, our best orthodontic case and be critical. But to acknowledge what the AAO is doing, I think the AAO is doing well. Andy, you mentioned that also. Mm-hmm. I feel really grateful that the AAO seems like it's adaptive, is responsive, is becoming younger. Sounds like literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
And, the sense I get is that the AAO is smart, that it's hiring experts to advise on how are things done in today's world, right? Here's how we used to do it. And you can go back to, even how orthodontics was done. Like when I graduated about 11 years ago, there were still a lot of plaster models. And I remember being kind of shocked in my first couple of years where I was in a practice as an associate and the doctor said, you know what? We're just not taking models anymore. Why? Well, because you don't really need to. You don't really need to take them. We don't use them. I'm just thinking, what the? And then just realizing, okay, well, times change, people change, things change. And I think the AAO has recognized we have to hold on to our bedrock principles, but we also have to move in the direction that society's going without jettisoning the things that really matter. So I think the AAO has done a great job. That's got to be a really difficult task to represent so many, speaking of diversity, such a diverse group of people, although we're probably less diverse than we'd like to admit in terms of personalities and stuff, right, Andy?
Diversity, of course, is an old wooden ship, if I remember Ron Burgundy.
Yes.
But anyway, I think the AAO has done great, and I feel satisfied personally. I just want to say that and give the AAO a plug that to me, I don't pay a ton of attention, but enough that I can see that they're being responsive and it feels like I feel well represented by them. So anyway, thanks for your service there. And I just want to say that I'm satisfied and hopefully other people feel the same way.
Always left me satisfied. Right, Brian?
That's what she said.
Yeah, there it is. I don't know if that's my goal. I don't know.
Well, along with this AAO, one of the segments that we always do on this show is to discuss a recent Facebook post. Recently, this one's coming from Jackson Kelley Griffith, and they wrote that they had a consultation coming in who's a new patient who's very anxious about receiving a recent email from one of these prominent companies. Of course, we're talking about Byte, which is one of those direct-to-consumer companies. So this is in the same vein as Smile Direct Club, Candid, which has also ceased operations at this point. But this email is a little bit disturbing here. So I mean, they basically notified that they're rolling back their operations. They're trying to reevaluate in light of new regulations, making sure that they're compliant. Of course, as orthodontists, we've had our suspicions for a really long time that these things are completely out of compliance with any sort of safety barriers. We have a lot to say on that, which we'll get to, of course. This company now is pausing treatment on those. All new patients, they're recommending that all patients currently in treatment take a step back and go get evaluated by a dentist to make sure that it's even safe for them to be providing care. All this stuff seems very obvious to any orthodontist who's been paying attention. But this does sort of underlie one of the biggest challenges I feel of the AAO, which is they're expected to be an advocacy group on behalf of orthodontists, but also our patients. I know that AAO has been struggling to get the right messaging out, especially when it came to a company like Smile Direct Club, which is now completely bankrupt. So we're at liberty to say their name on the air. But there was a time when we would get sued personally for even putting on our personal social media warnings to potential patients about the dangers of this operation. So if we're struggling with that, I know that the AAO has been involved with lawsuits around this sort of thing. And I wanted to talk to you as someone with an inside track just about the struggles that AAO has with this messaging. So could you speak to that a little bit, Matthew?
Yeah. I guess my first comment on that is just, you said it, we are an advocacy group and we're a professional association and support our members and our patients as well as we can. The kind of counter to that is we are not a regulatory group. So our word can be, an opinion that we give to legislators and hopefully it drives change. But our word is not, we can't tell direct-to-consumer things to go out of business. We can't give them cease and desist orders so their business can't run anymore. That kind of stuff has to come from two different things, either the FDA for calling the devices not safe or having too many side effects, or it'd have to come from, the state regulations at the state level, because almost all of that's governed at the state level. That's a challenge when there's one association trying to drive change in 50 different states with 50 different sets of laws and 50 different legislatures to pass things through. And the interesting thing about some of the letters coming from BITE is a lot of this stuff has started changing. I mean, the challenge is it takes time. And so Florida, Nevada, Illinois have all started passing legislations at the state level requiring an in-person exam prior to treatment. And do require that you know who your orthodontist or dentist, the doctor is, and be able to get a hold of them.
Novel concept, huh? I mean, to anyone who does this for a living, that just seems like such common sense.
It was the wild, wild west, dude.
10 years ago, who would have thought you needed a regulation around that? Because it was, and so it changes so fast in the landscape with technology that it takes a minute to catch up. But those are all states that have been the advocacy efforts from the AAO to try to get the wording and the changes in there. I mean, there's been lots of people personally in each of those states also helping drive change, but the messaging, we try to have a cohesive message from our association to get that together. And same thing with the FDA. There has been meetings between the AAO and the FDA to start looking at more of these negative situations that arise when there's no oversight and no exams that are, at the beginning of these rounds of treatment.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
You said, who could have guessed that, coming out of residency?
Yeah.
Well, so I graduated from University of Minnesota, as you know, your home state, your alma mater for dental school. And you mentioned that your dad, Dr. Brent Larson, was the program chair. So he was a program chair for Chris, and I, and at our graduation banquet, your dad is one of the most prescient, intelligent, thoughtful people I know. He said something like, okay, you graduates, in your careers, people will be able to go into a shopping center of some kind and order aligners from a vending machine type of a situation. And Chris and I'm talking to Chris after, I'm thinking, dude, bro, what profession did we just go into? What did we just do? But of course, we were all way too scared of this stuff. But to your dad's credit, your dad is a very forward-thinking man, and something that I've always admired about the Larson family. So, of course, I know your dad well, and you and your brother Chad is you're thoughtful and humble and very considerate. And yeah, your dad nailed that one, man. That was just a few years later. Chris actually was the one that introduced me to Smile Direct Club. He sent me a text and he's like, bro, look, what Dr. Larson said is here, or something like that. It's like, okay. I'm like, damn, man.
I didn't believe him at first, but it came to pass. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, did it come to pass? Kind of it did.
The idea of it.
Let's look at this, because we all graduated around the same time. And I remember having the exact same thoughts. Ben Burris was really big. He basically controlled the Facebook narrative at that point. This is, of course, before Orthodontic Pearls and all that. He was a strong advocate for Smile Direct Club. And I remember this was brand new. It was called Smile Care Club back then. He was giving out all these warnings, and I'm a brand new graduate. I don't really have my feet on the ground yet as far as what to expect in the profession. I was literally working as an associate in a corporate office. Let's talk about FOMO for a minute. Back then that was I want to say the peak of FOMO in the profession. I feel like it's scaled back a little bit now, but that was a big, big thing. I remember this trusted advisor, Ben Burris, advocating for this. I actually signed up as a provider because I was like, well, if he's saying that it's safe, if he's saying this is the future, I want to be a part of that before someone else beats me to it. My personal experience with that is exactly what we know now. It was completely ridiculous. If I would reject a case, it would get just passed along to another provider. They actually made a mistake, and I was included in an email thread where I had rejected a case because it was not safe to treat, and they just pass it on to the next guy 20 miles down the road.
Find a click monkey, yeah.
Right. That's how these companies operate. Of course, they ran with an iron fist for so long. Lawsuits, their legal bills were taking up a huge chunk of their revenue. They never actually made a profit, and ultimately, that's what ended up killing them. We'd love to think that it was they got their hand caught in the cookie jar and they overstepped, but really it was about the profitability of the company and the fact that they lost all their shareholder value very drastically. But, let's push back on this a little bit. So that prescient idea that you're going to be able to get aligners through a vending machine, you have Smile Direct Club. That was the first one to the playing field and the first one to fall hard. I've seen multiple practices out here in Phoenix try to start up their version of a direct-to-consumer product, and they've all gone out of business. Bite, is this the last domino to fall here? Have we seen the end of direct-to-consumer, or what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I would say, there's probably some place for some element of virtual care for convenience and looking at part of that. But I think the truly direct to consumer side of that is just kind of a model somewhat destined to failure, partially because there's too many different things you can miss at the beginning if you aren't able to screen in person. And that's why that's been a major push from the AAO is I don't know a good way around not seeing a person at the beginning. I mean, I know people who do virtual exams at the start, but they're really more of a screening visit to set up for a in-person one to do a final check and get things in place for actually starting treatment. And the second part of that is really the only thing that you can do direct to consumer is doing something with aligners, without attachments, without IPR, without constant checks. I can't name almost any cases that have come into my office in the last year that it met those criteria where I felt I could really easily get there with aligners without any attachments. And maybe the couple that did, I could probably do it cheaper than the direct-to-consumer parts because you're talking about
Isn't that the truth?
a handful of aligners.
Yeah, 5 aligners in-house, yeah.
Yeah, Chris, now you're a speaker for a prominent aligner company at this point. What are your thoughts on the limitations there? Do you think that this is a physical limitation of the system more than anything else?
I think it's both. I think if you don't have attachments, you're not going to be able to move teeth well. And I also believe that if someone can't communicate with the provider or get that proper screening, that it's not going to be something that A, they're going to trust, and B, that can deliver results that we expect. So I think a lot of the other aligner companies that are great, where they can just do one visit and maybe you push them out, you can see them in 8 weeks or 12 weeks. If they only come into your office 4 times, you can still scale, you can still be profitable, you can still have a little bit less than we used to, where we're seeing them every 4 weeks. I think that's probably where we should be if we're looking to get to that level. But I think to have complete remote care is going to be tough. Or like you said, if you use Grin and things like that, where they can send you photos and it helps you. But without that initial check, without that progress pan, and without that final, you can miss out on so many things beyond just the teeth too, that we are liable for and really is in the patient's best interest.
Well, you touched on something there, and I think that was the deal breaker for me was the initial X-rays. If you're not in the profession, it's really difficult to explain how crucial that is to a proper diagnosis, because what we're seeing in the mouth is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I would say that's as close to literal as you can get. You see the crown of the tooth, but there is a long root that goes into the jawbone, and that's where all the movement is occurring, and that's where also the pathology could lie. So exactly. You need to be able to look at the length of the root, for example. Is this root long enough that it can be moved without losing the tooth? Are there any kind of obstructions that I can't see by looking at the mouth just through a photograph? All kinds of things could be going on down there that would put the patient at risk of losing teeth, and you would have no idea until it's already too late. So that was the part that scared me the most, and ultimately why I ended up leaving as a provider, is that I just did not feel comfortable signing off on a treatment when I can't see the whole picture there. Have you guys had any of these patients coming into your office? These ones who have, I don't think that there's, at this point with bite going down, there's no one who's being actively treated remotely, at least not through any kind of legitimate source. Not that any of these are legitimate, but have you guys seen these come into your practice, and what has your experience been there? Matthew, did you had one?
Yeah, I was going to say definitely. And you were mentioning the importance of x-rays. I had one of my kind of favorite little experiences back and forth was I had a family come in who had gone through the whole screening process for a direct-to-consumer, had the plan all pulled up, and they were in my office asking why it was going to be so much more for treatment with us compared to doing some sort of mail order system. And pulled out their phone, thought they had their whole gotcha moment to me, that I was just trying to rip them off. Like, look, here's where the progression's going to go. Here's how they look nice and straight. And I showed them, okay, so look at the bottom where you have that small space between your two teeth. There's another tooth underneath there. And so they had an impacted lower canine, and they just closed the space over top and kept it down underneath the surface, as opposed to opening the space for the tooth to come in. And it's one of those, it makes us all laugh as orthodontists, but no one's going to know that looking at us. Like if the doctor's not giving that consent and seeing the x-rays underneath, how is any patient going through the process going to know that part of it?
They can't know it. This is something that, there's a reason why we go to school for 11 years to become orthodontists. And I don't say that to sound pompous or, elitist or anything, but there is truth to that. Like, I think that there are things, how long does it take you guys to evaluate a pano at this point? I mean, I'm basically glancing at it and I can tell everything I need to know. But when I was first evaluating x-rays, well, do you remember the first time you saw an x-ray in your radiology class in dental school, that panoramic x-ray? I was looking at that thing saying like, what the hell am I looking at? It's like multiple spinal columns. This mouth is stretched out and made flat, and there's like all these superimpositions. I'm like, how can the right ear be there and there at the same time? And what is that big thing? Oh, that's the tongue. It doesn't look anything like a tongue. It was a very confusing image to look at. But over the course of 11 years of looking at those things, now it's like, you just glance at it and you can see everything that you need. It's really hard to convey the amount of knowledge that it takes to look at something like that. And unfortunately, I think as humans, we tend to discount that which we don't understand. And I think that this is a great example of that. Brian, have you had much experience with this direct-to-consumer stuff?
We've had a few patients that have done, one of the DTC, as we say, companies and have come in. I'm really more interested in talking about why is this happening, right? And you alluded to this, Andy, that there are some things that you need depth of information. And in our society, we're increasingly becoming more horizontal, meaning more things going on at once. We want to be more efficient. Why? So we can do something else that's also quick and not very deep. Why? Well, so then we can do something. Well, we need to save time for what? Save time for what precisely? And so I think at the core, we have to acknowledge like we're as a culture addicted to superficiality, doing more things at a more superficial level. And some things you have to go at least to an appropriate depth on, right?
Yeah.
You have to go to appropriate depth on. I think where, in this, we live in this private equity fueled world where sometimes sustainability is not the goal. It's getting your money quick and then getting out.
Yes.
And so the problem with that is you can't go deep in a world like that. And so what can we do to make as much money as we can, as quickly as we can, and then get out before the thing fails? Well, I think that's what happened here. There are certain things you can't cut out. You have to go deep on. You have to see. How many times have each one of us gotten our treatment coordinator comes to us before we go into the exam room, shows us the photos, shows us the x-ray, we look at them. In our mind, we have a diagnosis. And then you go in there, you have the patient in the chair, they bite down. It looks nothing like the way they were biting for the photos. Why? Because when you tell patients to bite, they don't ever bite normal or very rarely. It's like, hey, bite on your back teeth. Your back teeth.
For those of you who can't see, because this is not a video podcast, Brian's doing the classic, call that a Sunday bite, I believe, where you're biting for. And we all see this as orthodontists every day.
All the bites, yeah.
And you have to guide the patient into the right spot.
Right. So what he's describing as patients bite forward, they bite on their front teeth.
In weird ways, odd ways that they would never bite. Anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is there are certain things you can't cut out.
Yeah.
There are certain steps you can't skip in life. And in this money-fueled world where money is the object and breadth is the object and not depth, you're going to see this stuff. And I think we were foolish to fear it so much because we have, as orthodontists, we have depth. We're concentrating on tenths of a millimeter. And sometimes to our patient's chagrin because they're so annoyed that we're overly perfectionistic. But we have depth, and we feared this company that had almost no depth. Yeah. And in some ways, we were selling ourselves way short. I think that was, to some degree, some people were really scared about it. Other people were less scared. But I think to some degree, we were all a little bit afraid because it was such a disruptor. But I think for me, the moral of the story is know what you do. And if you have depth, then you're going to appeal to people who want depth. And there are always going to be people who want depth, maybe increasingly less. Our culture is more like the TikTok generation, quick, boom, bing, bam, boom. I just finished the book Fahrenheit 451, written in 1952 by a guy named Ray Bradbury, and he's describing the future. And it's like today, he says, people don't read books in those days. In fact, books are outlawed.
Yeah.
Because people just want a short Reader's Digest. And he says, and then it went from the Reader's Digest to a summary of the Reader's Digest. And then it went to what can you fit in 2 minutes? And then it went from what can you put in 12 lines about this book? And then it went into, I just need to know enough about these subjects that I can talk with my neighbors about them so that they think that I'm well-read. That's how we live. So that's what that's what these companies, I think, were trying to do. And they realized there are certain steps you can't skip.
Yeah, I completely agree. I kind of summarize it sometimes to people that the whole aligner paradigm shift was because we probably as a profession didn't give enough credit to aesthetics. And then I think
Mm-hmm.
as the whole direct to consumer paradigm shift, I think happened because there was a huge pocket because I think we kind of missed what we could do to help convenience. And
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
not that you have to jump completely over to that model, but I think more frequently than I used to have some sort of more limited options where they only come in a few different visits or do things with aligners that maybe could be better treated with braces with a lot more visits to our practice. But knowing that it's really going to be the patient's going to do no treatment or go somewhere else, or I can do a reasonable good job, but maybe I won't be able to fully correct the bite on the right side or something like
Yep.
that. And I think
Sure.
giving that option, at least, even if it's not the textbook ideal in some cases, is something that is a little bit more on my mindset now.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
I recently read Yuval Noah Harari's book, Nexus, and I've spoken to you guys a little bit about that, but he's a historian, and he talks about the evolution of how we store and process, exchange data, and then just how much that influences our societies. And, when you can't have that discussion without an understanding of evolutionary forces, of natural selection or what have you. Evolution is such a complex thing. And I think of this in terms of an evolution of an idea more than an evolution of a company or even a segment of the profession. What's fascinating to me is you can look at this as it actually made the profession stronger for reasons like you were mentioning there, Matthew.
Mm-hmm.
It has opened our eyes to a neglected segment of potential patients who do want straight teeth, but they don't want the inconvenience of an office visit. Maybe they don't want the same price. Maybe their expectations are a lot lower than what we're trained to do, because we are trained to be perfectionists. You guys, Brian, you said that we're trained to go after that, 10th of a millimeter. And, a lot of times that requires a 2-year treatment plan with full braces to get it just right. But what this opened our eyes to is that there's a lot of patients out there who just want the social 6 aligned, or who have a very specific problem. Even in residency, we're comfortable with limited treatment to a degree. We're comfortable with doing a forced eruption case for a crown procedure. We're comfortable with phase 1 treatment, which could be considered a limited treatment. I think what this did is expanded our, I don't know if compassion is the right word, or just understanding of what's out there. And in a way, I feel that because these companies were so shallow in their diagnosis and didn't quite hit the mark and eventually went out of business, it has still left a mark on the profession. We've sort of picked up that standard, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And now we're delivering a more nuanced, a bigger breadth of care, which I think is going to make it that much more challenging for someone to enter this market and disrupt the orthodontic profession again. This is basically, I think it was actually the Innovator's Dilemma that spoke about this. So you have an incumbent who gets a big portion of market share, And the reason that they are open to disruption is, for one reason, they're slow to move. They can't adapt as quickly. For another, they're generally catering to the premium market segment. So you could call it high income or the more desirable customers out there. And then a new market entrant can come in with a cheaper product, or maybe a product that is on some level inferior, but also meets a need that the other product is not able to meet. And as they get a foothold, the bigger company ignores them, because we don't want that segment anyway. That's worthless to us. It's not worth distracting from our core competency. But if you let that go unchallenged, it just grows and evolves into something that ends up being better.
Yeah.
Streaming is a great example of this. We had cable TV for years, for decades. And then streaming comes in, started off with that mail order DVD, and cable's like, it doesn't matter. And then you get into this Netflix streaming, and then now everything's going to streaming. And cable, I'm surprised it's lasted even this long.
Yeah.
But again, that's sort of my long explanation. I think it's going to be harder to disrupt this industry going forward, because we are more aware of these things and we are covering all of our bases at this point. Not to mention that consumer sentiment plays a huge role in this, and the fact that so many people have been injured or ripped off by these companies, and now one by one they're just closing down or completely changing operations. I think that there is going to be a lack of trust if someone tries to do this in the near future. In the distant future, who's to say? But I would like to think that this buffers the profession. I think it's going to increase the standard of care. Not only that these guys are out of business, but that they existed in the first place to bring attention to orthodontists. What are your thoughts?
I like the way we're hinting on a lot of this stuff. We saw that with Invisalign. I mean, they came to us saying, hey, we're going to create this system where we do it with clear aligners. And we totally shooed them off. We said, you know what? It's got to be braces. It's got to be the correct orthodontic way or nothing. It was, the best or nothing, basically. So then they went direct to consumer, and then everyone came to us saying, this is what we want. And that was very effective. And now a lot of practices are heavy aligners. And in a way that was good, because it opened a new treatment modality that we were just not having anything to do with. We were very vocal about that. And I think the same thing with this direct to consumer. I think we can shun it and say it's completely BS and not good, or we can look at how can we embrace convenience. Like you said, Matthew, what are ways that we can make it so these patients want more convenience, but still uphold a high standard of care? Like, Invisalign got so much better over time. Clear aligners got so much better over time. And now there's several companies that are coming out with even more inventions that are making it just better and better, which would have happened if we didn't at least embrace the want or the need of the community for something like that. So, but I think you'll never really replace, knowing your doctor or having x-rays or having that depth of connection, but we can find ways to make it more convenient.
Yeah. To your point, Chris, I think it's really interesting that it's pushed us to define acceptable or good in more relative terms. Right? Because we were the perfectionists, and we were almost prisoners of our perfectionism. The orthodontist had, when you treated a case, you sort of felt almost guilty if you didn't treat it to a certain classification called a class 1, for those of you that aren't in the profession. And we felt like straightening our teeth and providing a beautiful smile, but if we didn't achieve a certain bite, it was like a failure. We almost felt ashamed of it. And that's how we were conditioned and taught. It was like, it's all or none. We're going for the whole thing, or don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And it's like, well, hold on a second. Okay, that's an ideal, yes. And that's good to have ideals. You have to have ideals. You have to have things to aim for. But what about the cases where if you don't meet the ideal, it's still healthy, still functional, still okay? It's not textbook, it's not ideal, but it's okay. How often do all of us live with things that are not ideal? Every day. And so I think we almost, with upturned noses said, we're not going to do anything less than short of ideal.
Right.
And I think this revealed to us, hold on a second. Okay. And I think from a philosophical standpoint, I can see why as a profession, we'd have this hesitancy to go there, because you think, well, if I'm dropping my standards, then what is there? Where's the floor? And that's scary to think you're stepping off into this void. And what are you going to become? And are you just going to become a sellout? And then what happens? Are there no standards at all? Right? You can see how your mind goes there. But I think to acknowledge that, hey, we don't have to be so black and white in our thinking. It's not all or none. We can simultaneously hold a high standard, but we can relativize it and say, okay, this is the gold standard. Well, what about for this case where they don't want, their bite's not ideal, but we can get it functional and healthy. And what's a good outcome for this?
Yeah.
Okay, so then that's a different standard, but you're not comparing it with that. So I think it made it, like you said, Andy, a perfect word, nuanced. It made us more whole, more complete providers. And as long as we still maintain standards within those sort of different classes of difficulty, well, I think aligners can be really great with no attachments and no IPR for very certain specific movements, but they're very certain and they're very specific. That's why the direct-to-consumer stuff with no attachments and no IPR and no actual supervision was never going to work when you cast the net as wide as they did. They had to cast the net very, very narrowly, but you can't do that with the way that they approached it.
Right.
You mentioned, how do you call this whole planning? I call it personalized care. I mean, you're getting the patient what they want, and it really depends on what they want. You're not going to hit every patient's need with a quick, limited, direct-to-consumer plan. You're not going to hit every patient's need with full treatment and everything. Some of my happiest patients who are the biggest advocates of the practice, I wouldn't submit their case to boards because we didn't do an option that would get to board standards. And some of my least happy patients have freaking perfect teeth that would pass the board exam to no problem. And I'm sure you guys have come across that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where
You're on your 58th refinement, lady.
There's a person behind that smile is what it comes down to. And I think most of us are trained this way, if not in residency, certainly in the consulting courses we take afterwards. Even in residency, that chief complaint was the first question that you always want to address. And I remember when I heard that concept, well, what does it matter what the patient's chief complaint is? I know what's wrong with them and I'm going to fix it. That's my arrogance showing through. But why is that so important? Because if you don't address the chief complaint, they're not going to be satisfied. If you do address the chief complaint and then you overserve in other areas, then they're also going to be unsatisfied because it's like, well, I only wanted this one tooth fixed. Why did it take you 2 years to do that? I mean, where I found that balance for myself personally is that informed consent. So I believe that I can provide any kind of safe treatment that makes my patient's situation better, as long as they're fully informed of the alternatives. Could we have done this a better way? If they know that and they turn it down, then great. I feel I have a clean conscience as long as I'm providing safe, effective care that is improving their situation.
Yes.
What I won't do, and I get this request every now and then, is like these teenagers now, they want vampire fangs, for example, right? And I tell them, look, if you don't want me to enameloplasty those and round off those canines, I won't touch them, but I am definitely not filing those into fangs or adding any composite to give you that. So again, it's like we have to know the limits of what safe and effective care is, and then we convey that to our patients. And ultimately, if their wants and desires are within the bounds of those limits, I think it's, if not us, who else should provide that care? Right.
And if they know the trade-off too, like they might want those retroclined incisors straightened out properly, but they have to know that they might leave the lettuce behind in the sandwich, and there's a trade-off there, right? So, and you don't want to leave them, like you said, any worse off than they were. So you want to try to keep at least, that might be one that you decide not to treat. But if it's one where the bite's fine and they just want a few teeth aligned, they're getting married in 3 months, then, great.
This has been a great discussion, guys. I feel like we could go on forever about this, but we do have to move on. You guys mentioned, so you went to school and your program chair was Matthew's dad. And Matthew, you were in a completely different program. That's fascinating. But I think you actually even came back and taught. So, tell us a little bit about your guys' story and this interesting dynamic you have with your residency.
It was great. I kind of knew I was going to end up practicing in the Midwest, so it was fun to kind of get away to a different area of the country for a while. Because as you guys know, once you're settled in orthodontic practice, especially owning, it's nearly impossible to kind of be moving at that point. And then, back at that point, Proffit was still involved in the UNC program. So it was really great to be able to learn from him. In fact, I pointed out in one of the previous editions of the textbook that one of the upper bite removal class 2 camouflage case, a case that should be finished a certain way, the X-ray superimposition was in class 1 molar. And so he gave me the opportunity then to go fix it. And so he had me go back to the original tracings. And so for the next edition of the textbook, it was the correct image as it was corrected. And then he was impressed that I did that well, so that he gave me all of chapter 8 to look through and see what additions I had. And then that went pretty well, so he gave me chapter 9. And it's been a fun process through it all to kind of just get more involved in the opportunities that get presented. And that's how Prof used to phrase it, is you had an opportunity. So-and-so is arriving at the airport today. You have an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I would urge anyone to embrace those as they come up, even if sometimes they are time commitments, because they've definitely added to my life and how things have been going as time goes on. Yeah. But after graduation, had immediately right after, I actually was at graduation, and the next morning I took an early flight back to Eau Claire and was working in our practice in the afternoon. So we had cold started the practice. Wow. Katie had graduated 6 months before me. She was a 2.5-year program, and I was in a 3-year program. And so she had everything kind of up and running, just waiting for me to graduate as well. I did a couple bondings with her initially when she was an orthodontist and I wasn't licensed yet because I hadn't finished residency, so I got to be her assistant. I'm not as good of an assistant as I am an orthodontist, I'll tell you that much.
No, I would imagine not.
I had some time at that point to be able to go to the university and help teach. Actually, I still do work part-time and am there once a month at Minnesota teaching, which is great. I love being with the residents. But yeah, I had the blessing. I only think I gave a couple lectures at that point, but to see Brian and Chris there, and it was great. So,
if you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
So you guys met Matthew while he was
He was our adjunct faculty.
Yeah, he
was our instructor, man.
Yes.
Adjunct faculty. He had just graduated.
I think we met at GORP before then, right?
Oh, probably.
Less formal.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. For those who are not in the know, GORP stands for Graduate Orthodontic Residency Program.
It's a meeting every summer that all the orthodontic residents generally attend about.
Kind of like ortho resident summer camp, right? And you just they all get together. I think every other year it's at the University of Michigan. And, it's just a good time. I remember, fond memories of GORP doing the canoes down the river and everything. It was good times.
That was my third date with my wife. So yeah.
What? Are you serious?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wait, how did you and Katie meet? You were in school together, right?
I was at North Carolina and she was at Temple, and we met at an orthodontic meeting. I was fixing Prof's laptop and she thought I looked pretty cute.
No kidding.
And Katie Klein will take credit too, because she did actually connect us as we were walking to the social gathering afterwards. So I have to throw the shout out there.
Nice.
But no, we were both looking to kind of go back to the same area. Eau Claire is actually my wife's hometown, so we settled here.
Okay.
But I grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, which is only a couple hours away. So we both knew we were going to come back to the same area. We're about the only people on the East Coast that were looking to come back somewhere colder.
I mean, I would never have even heard of this place if it wasn't for you.
Yeah.
Like Eau Claire is.
We're the connection point kind of between the Twin Cities and Madison. So it's,
gotcha.
Yeah. And actually, you can go almost either location before you find another orthodontist. So it's actually an interesting little kind of pocket in there. So,
oh my gosh, I'm so jealous.
Good spot.
I could probably, I could literally throw a stone out my window right now and probably hit 3 of them.
Now you just
out in Phoenix, right? One of them's probably Chris.
Yeah, right. But no, it was actually interesting because when we opened, we were the 5th practice in town that was open in Eau Claire. And now we're actually one of 2 practices that have left. Everything now is consolidated to just us and one other office. Granted, each of us have 2 other orthodontists in-house, so there's still a similar number of orthodontists, but it is interesting how it seems like it is beneficial to, as much as you can, kind of consolidate and merge to some degree and with some cases. Yeah. So, yeah, that was interesting because along the process after graduation, we did a couple of years out of residency as we started. One of the guys in town who said he was not going to sell for at least 5 or 10 years approached us and said he was done. And so we took over his practice at that point. It's interesting the things you learn along the way as things get acquired. And at the same time, we were also still filling in a lot of offices around the Twin Cities. So got to see a lot of different practices. If I could give one bit of advice to new residents coming out, or frankly, anyone at any point in practice, is go see as many practices as you can. You'll learn so much walking into a different office and how things run. You kind of get used to the blind spots in your own practice and the routine of how things go, and seeing how it can happen a different way is really eye-opening for some of that. The reason I kind of was bringing that up is with that first practice we took over, their whole financial system was to charge the whole balance day one. And then the financial coordinator knew it in her head when they said that they were going to pay. Oof. And so the most challenging part of that whole
in my head, I hate that.
Oh yeah. The most challenging part of the whole transition was it took like a month to get a 30, 60, 90-day report because they had to manually open every chart, look through what was left, and then they had to talk to that financial coordinator to see how things balanced out. And so it's interesting because it gets you to turn over stones you haven't looked over in a while to kind of work how it went into the practice.
Yep.
And then just 2 years ago, we purchased one of the other offices in town, which was kind of a surprise, but that was an older doctor who is now retired, and a younger doctor had bought in there and then decided that wasn't the location she wanted to be and decided to move. And so we kind of picked that up somewhat. It was a pretty quick transition because we were approached in September and she wanted to be at the other practice that she was going towards in January. And so going through all the paperwork, transitioning, get that all in place was only 3-4 months. But, when we took that over, one of the interesting things there is I think a lot of stuff was in the process of changing between an old system and a new system, between the one who was kind of phasing out and the new one coming in. And learning that and figuring out how to move that to your own system and not be stuck in the middle, I think was eye-opening. Being indecisive in the middle is probably worse than choosing one option or the next or the new thing. Always. So I mean,
totally.
That was, I think, a great lesson for that, is that if we're going to do something, you can experiment and figure out if it's actually where you want to go. But when you decide to implement and stick to it. Yeah. I think that's really beneficial. So
I think all 3 of us struggle with that as perceptive personalities, where we tend to get paralysis by analysis. And sometimes you just got to get moving.
Here it is, back to personality types again. So just as a review. So Brian and Chris, you guys are the same thing. It's that ENFP. That's the campaigner. I call it the puppy dog, very enthusiastic, very likable, but chasing cars, chasing your own tail. Sometimes you can get that chaotic energy. I got the same chaotic energy. I'm an ENTP. The difference between us is basically how we make decisions. So whereas you guys, stereotypically, you'll make decisions based on how it affects people around you, or more importantly, your own personal value system. My decisions are made more from my personal logic system. So if it makes sense to me, it doesn't matter how I feel about it. That's what I accept as reality. Now, Matthew, you've got the same personality type as my wife. That's ISFJ, and that's the defender. That's a great personality, great balance to mine. You're a little more grounded and committed, I would say. So I think that if you're anything like my wife, she's very traditional, doesn't delve too much into the abstract like the 3 of us do. It's more, what has worked in the past is what's going to work in the future, or, show me the evidence and I'm going to go forward with it. And there's that level of commitment there, like you were saying. So like Chris mentioned, that can be a challenge for the three of us over on this side, but very important aspect of a success. Did you have something to say about that, Brian?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think one of the great things about learning about yourself and your personality is to seeing with more clarity your blind spots, seeing what you're not good at, and then trying to not do that quite so damn much. It doesn't mean you're going to be amazing at it, but Matthew, to your point, you said being in ambivalence basically is worse than just having a decision. I've come to truly believe that. And I found that, okay, gosh, as I do that, as I actually live that principle, so I now believe in that principle. So if I'm trying to live that principle, I generally like that outcome a lot better than being ambivalent. So that's where knowing your tendency and knowing what your weakness is and being conscious about choosing something different is empowering. And so that's why I think the personality studying can be helpful that way.
I'm not sure if you guys have done it. We obviously have chatted a lot about personalities over time. One other part to that too that I don't know if you guys have done any of the Strength Finder analysis. The Gallup puts that out. It's been out for a little while, but I did it through a leadership Eau course that I did a few years back. But basically, it has like 34 different categories, and it finds your top 5. And it's not as much personality based, but it relates a lot. So my top 5, and the titles are kind of self-explanatory for some of it, but you can look it up online. But my 5 are learner, achiever, analytical, developer, and responsibility. And they kind of group these into like whether it's strategic thinking, relationship building, influencing, or executing. And those tendencies, I have 2 in the executing and 2 in the strategic thinking. So I'm really good at thinking things through. I have less in like the influencing, relationship building. So getting people on board and starting, like being the actual initiator of things, is not my strength. And I think the wording of that is important because what they emphasize is not necessarily that you have a bunch of weaknesses, but you have gifts that you can do really well. I'm great at taking things and organizing it through and getting figured out how we're going to get to the deadline. Great for orthodontic treatment, to get a treatment plan together and get to the finish line there. I am not great at initiating a bunch of projects that I don't know the full timeline in advance. My wife, one of the categories is activator, and those are the ones that just start things up. She sees something and immediately wants to start action to kind of fixing that, and then sometimes leaves it to me to finish. But that's the way the relationship works, and which is great because we fill each other's strengths for that. Where I can make sure that we get to completion of some of the things, not that she doesn't ever complete things, but her strength is finding those new things that need to be addressed. And she has the strength of the relationship building. She does a lot more of the outreach around the community. I know and like a lot of dentists in town. She has become very close personal friends and then therefore pulls me into the whole relationship too. But she's way better at developing that part of it. And I think just knowing where we mix on that is really important. And if you go through their full program with that, they'll actually show you, like, for that type of leadership style, if you're in a position where you're leading others, your second, like, who's supporting you needs to have some of these traits. Like, they need to be able to take these other ideas and fill in the voids. And, it's very much related to how the personalities interact. But it's just a little bit different of a blend of kind of where to look at that. So.
Yeah, I'm looking this up right now. So if you go to gallup.com, I think these are called the Clifton Strengths. Is that right, Matthew?
Yes. Yep.
That sounds right to you. Yeah, this is a fascinating thing. I'm going to have to take this one. It does look like it's a paid exam.
It is, yeah.
If you're a student, looks like there's a student discount here. But yeah, this sounds fascinating to me. I definitely want to check that out. Yeah. It's interesting what you were saying about your wife being sort of the socialite. I know your wife is an ENFJ. Again, that's the protagonist. That's the same as Chris's wife. Mm-hmm. We know the Teeters fairly well. We hang out with them quite a bit out here. And, from my experience, that sounds almost identical, or like at least very similar to your dynamic. Can you talk to that a little bit, Chris?
Yeah, I would say, and I even think back to like you and Jenny, but like with Morgan and I, she loves to go out and socialize and be with people, and I do too, but she's very direct. And for me, the only place where we differ is on the P and the J. So I had come up with all kinds of ideas. I'm a little ADD. I like to be involved in, like Kyle was saying earlier, 10 different things at once. It makes me happy to kind of bounce around and all that. Morgan, she's like, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to do it right. Or when I'm indecisive, she'll say that one, she's like, just go with that one. But what I've always admired, and you could talk to this more, is I love how you and Jenny are complete opposites, where you would go out and hang out with me or hang out with other dentists. We'd all go out together. And then you're like, all right, Jenny, it's your turn. Like, I'll stay back at home and you go out, it's your turn. And she's like, no, you don't get it. This is where I want to be.
That was really an interesting discovery for us is, you talk about your weaknesses, Brian, and I think that personalities, they showcase both your strengths. And I think that something like this Clifton strengths, Matthew, is probably a little more into the weeds with that. I'm really looking forward to taking that.
By the way, Brian, arms is not one of the categories for strength.
Is gut one of the categories?
I still think Brian's muscles are all just for show, but
I use them, bro.
At any rate.
I use them, man.
But what we noticed early on with me and Jenny is that we were opposite, not only in our Myers-Briggs, which is what we're always talking about, those 16 personalities, but Kolbe Index is another really interesting one. Have any of you guys taken the Kolbe Index?
Done the Kolbe,
Yes, a long time ago.
Familiar with it?
Been a while. Yeah.
So that one's a fascinating one. And there's basically 4 categories, and it has to do with your willpower. Okay, so it's not a strength necessarily. It's not a weakness necessarily. It's just more about how you approach tasks optimally to take advantage of the limited willpower that we all have. And the theory goes that there's certain tasks that are going to energize us, and there's certain tasks that are going to drain us. Chris, for example, he's into music, he's into working out, he's into fitness. Those things give him energy. Whereas something else, what's something that drains you, Chris? Let me think. I'm not sure there's anything.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing.
Chris is like a limitless battery. They're like an arc reactor incarnate. But is there anything that would drain you?
Reading legal documents, Chris.
There you go.
There you go. Oh my gosh, that would drain any of us. But it does have some insight there. Well, Jenny and I are the exact opposite in our profiles there. So Matthew, you mentioned that Katie is the type who likes to start things. So from a Kolbe Index perspective, that's a high quick start, which means that you're energized by starting new projects. That's mine. That's actually my highest rating on there. So I have the most energy to start something new. What I don't have as much energy for is fact finding. That's my lowest category. So, I can do it. Obviously, you don't get through school without learning how to do it, but those things just drove me crazy. Mm-hmm. I had such a hard time sitting in lecture my whole life, just sitting still and having information thrown at you. It's like, I just need to get, and Kolbe will tell you this, for my personality, you got to get to the gist of what's being said there and then just get out and experiment, get out and get started with it. So I learned by experimentation. Mm-hmm. Again, Jenny's the opposite. And I think that balances us out well. To Chris's prompt there, when I first started the practice, I was the one going out and doing all the social events. And I kind of liked that. It was fun for me. But what I hated doing was payroll. When Jenny joined the practice, I was like, if I have to do one more payroll, it only takes 15 minutes. It's really not that big of a deal, but it would be 15 minutes and I felt like I'd worked for 3 hours and I couldn't even get through it in one sitting. I was just so bored. So Jenny would start doing that. And after like a couple of months of this, I'm like, I get my energy back and I'm like, you know what? I've gone out to 3 dinners this month and, Jenny's always at home, doing the friggin' payroll. So I was like, you know what, baby, I'll take a turn this month and you go out. And she's like, no, that sounds awful. She doesn't like to go out and mingle like that. She's a strong introvert. And I realized that, the payroll does not drain her the way that it does me. So I think it comes down to that balance. And like you said, Matthew, learning who's your support network and surrounding yourself by not identical people, but complementary.
And same with your team, right? Get the right people in the right seats.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I love that our marketing looks great, but if I had to look through the details of how to do that, it drives me crazy because they all look the same to me. But yeah, I can sit there and balance the books all day long and organize the systems of the practice, and that's great. So yeah.
No, fascinating how this stuff works. I'm going to have to check out this strength finder. That sounds awesome. Well, Matthew, I do want to talk a little bit about direction of technology in the profession. You do have a background with technology. You obviously were on the AAO committee as well. Tell us what's in store for us for the future. Anything exciting coming up in the profession?
Well, I just was going to touch a little bit on, in terms of, I think 3D printing is always having a growing presence with some of that. I don't know if you've seen some of the posts, but Christian Groth's been testing some of the direct print aligners.
Please, not another direct to consumer.
No, not yet. No, not ever. But but some of those direct print aligners, and that material has come a long way in a few years. He was just posting about how still to do a set of aligners with the standard way that we've been doing it and printing models and then vacuum forming the aligner material on top and trimming that out and going through that whole process. For his staff, doing a whole set of those takes about an hour. And right now, those direct print ones are still taking about 2.5 hours. So there's still some development there. I know a couple people who have tried testing some of them, and I still think that color stability is not there where they look really nice coming off of things and clear, and give it a couple weeks with things and they start to kind of discolor because they just don't have the same this is the material science in me, but the same polymer cross-linking, and they're not as tight.
Sure.
But that's a really interesting development in how that is going to go in the future. And then I don't know how much you guys have seen with how the labs are doing things nowadays with some of that, but it is crazy how much is being automated with that. And so now there's units that, it'll just keep printing and it'll just pop them into a bin and then go to the next print and keep going. And so you can process, thousands of these in a day with some of these big printers in these labs, and then have some of the vacuum form and the trimming happen automatically as well. I think that's going to be expensive, but a growing thing that you see in these big labs where they can still turn it around really fast. I think and the same side by side. So I think there's always going to be a place for, if you're doing volume, outsourcing to that one of those big labs, and the third party is going to always be there, and it's going to get cheaper and easier as time goes on. But I think it's the same thing in our office. Things are getting cheaper. We're not going to be that full automated system because I don't need to make 1,000 a day. But that's been really the cost of doing that now in office is really inexpensive, where it's worth having that come in and to be able to have the control in office to have that there. And that's been a really fun thing. I don't know if you guys know, but one of the things that I'll talk about on occasion, I'm still probably kind of an idiot for doing it, but I have all of our D-bonds. When we take braces off, I'll only remove some of the back brackets that first day, and then we'll scan with the front bracket still on. I have that all digitally removed in ULab by our assistant, and they'll do that. And then I actually double check the whole occlusion and where things are all settled to see if I need any activation in that. And basically every case, I do a little bite settling into that to make sure that things are perfect. Yeah. Sometimes I do a few aligners to fine tune things. But for me, that's been my double check of my cases, because it's hard to take the time and find the time to sit there and put the models together and see if things really finished what you wanted. To me, that's been a really nice way of seeing where we progress through treatment and really planning that out.
And we just started doing that too. We've been using Archform, where I'll look at the 3D model, just kind of like ULab, and I'll see that this lower left too is a little rotated in that I might have missed. And then I can move that forward in the final retainer and deliver it. And it's just such a nice double check, as you mentioned.
I feel like these finishing aligners, this is not a new topic. This has been around for several years, but I've always been a real believer in that. Like, if you want to look at hybrid treatment, I would say the way that I hear it described online, I feel like so many people get it wrong, is where you start with aligners, and then if it doesn't work because of compliance or limitations of the system, you finish up with braces. And to me, that just feels so backwards. And what you're describing here, Matthew, just seems so intuitive to me. I mean, the big movements, the arch development, the leveling, the space opening or space closure. I mean, that braces are so clearly superior mechanically to get that done. But I think one of the biggest challenges is finishing a case with braces. Not insurmountable. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that that's impossible to do. It certainly is not. But if you could get those braces off, say 6 months early, and just finish with a couple of aligners, it makes all the sense in the world to me. Of course, you still have the compliance issues and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I know, Ormco is going this direction of the hybrid treatment, having one package where you could start off with a digital scan and do some indirect bond braces. And then just my idea is once you get to that pan and repo, because look, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but that pan and repo appointment feels like the most time consuming and just like biggest sand in the gears of an efficient system. I mean, in our office, we actually break it into 2 appointments. We'll do records first. I'll evaluate everything, look at the photos and decide what I need to reposition. Then we bring them back again for a second hour-long appointment where we actually reposition these things. If I could eliminate that whole thing by just doing a scan and getting the final details with aligners, that just makes all the sense in the world to me. Do you see that as a potential direction here, Matthew?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The one way, like you're just mentioning, going 2 aligners with that where, you can finish, or sometimes you're still not at the stage where you can say the tip is wrong on some brackets and you need some movements that aren't as good with aligners. One of the other things, I'll get back to the unit I've got right now, but there are, the old SureSmile system used to have these wire bent robots that you have to outsource to a lab, have quite a bit of turnaround time to get back. But it was an interesting, cool system where these robots bend these wires depending on where you want the final teeth to finish. Yote is a company that they just came out with a unit they're kind of in beta testing for, where it'll bend arch wires like that in office. So you could take a scan chair side like that. It'll run it through the AI software to get the alignment. You can tweak it like a ClinCheck, like a Invisalign aligner plan. And then you could have it bend the wire there in the office. I don't know what the eventual turnaround time will be. It's probably going to be quicker than some of our typical like 15 half-hour appointments, but still dramatically faster than outsourcing it to another spot and having it shipped back.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I know Simon Graff is beta testing one of these. He's actually scared that might be the next thing that's coming up as a disruptor, because it's so easy to get some of these kind of fine-tuned bends that used to be one of the technical sides that were really difficult and needed a lot of training for. And so he's interested to see how that actually kind of changes the profession going forward.
Interesting.
So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But I absolutely see benefits of being able to do more digitally with that as kind of a correction, or do things more hybrid.
You mentioned wire bending. I mean, you said that's mainly for in-house fixed retainers, but do you see that? Like a SureSmile, I think, didn't work so good for that. I mean, I never use it myself. I think Brian might have used that a little bit, at least for clear aligners, but I haven't heard the best feedback from those SureSmile bent aligners. I mean, wires.
Yeah.
If one of them breaks, for example, you're basically screwed, right?
Sure. This is a new one, so I didn't come back to it. You're right. I do have their current unit that they have is a wire bender that bonds lingual fixed retainers. So I have one. It is sized for a very specific material, so I have to have the exact brand of an 026 stainless steel, and that's the only thing that it'll bend. But you plug in the model, you draw the path across the teeth that you want it to go, and it'll do all those bends to perfectly adapt to those teeth.
Man, that's slick.
And clip it, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Before I oversell that a little bit, there is, I think their software doesn't always accommodate for the full thickness of the wire. So I do shrink the models by 2%. I can probably make a post on Pearls and go through some details there, but it's not perfect, but it saves me so much time. And I'm a strong believer in those fixed lower bond retainers that are only glued to the canines, so that you still have the cleanliness of being able to floss in between. Because frankly, if I had it glued to each tooth, I don't know if I would maintain that as well as I should.
That's a great point.
But that's a really challenging thing to efficiently turn around. If you take brackets off, it's hard you almost have to do 2 sets of retainers, like a temporary removable one while you order something different. This, because so I make that off of the same scan that we were talking about earlier. I digitally remove the brackets. We export the models. That model is used to make that lower bonded retainer. And then we just block out to put a clear retainer over top of that. It's all ready for the patient chair side. For a normal braces removal, it's 45 minutes to get brackets off, polished, bonded retainer on, final records are all done, and they're out the door. And then there's not this mixed message of it's really, really important to wear your retainers all the time. I'll get it to you next week.
Yeah.
So I love
nice.
being able to deliver those chairside that same day that we get the brackets off.
Yeah.
That sounds like a huge benefit. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. And yeah, if you want to post about that on Pearls as you get more information, I think that would be amazing.
And then to clarify to my previous point, the next machine that they're working on is one that sits in your office and does an arch wire. So you can select your finishing arch wire. It'll run it through their system, and then it'll bend it right there, basically chairside. It'll probably be a longer chairside visit. But the interesting with that is the wire breaks, just send it to rebend. It'll probably bend it again in about a minute. It doesn't take long to bend these wires. If the next
duplicate it precisely.
If the next time you have heavy contact on one premolar on the right side, go back to that model and bend it down and have it rebend it, and it's going to have that wire right ready for you that day. It doesn't get to the point where you can probably virtually do it yet, but I mean, you can almost prep these appointments based on what you're seeing if you had a virtual model from the patient. It really allows us to take advantage of some of the digital tools we have now.
Well, yeah, that's a lot to look forward to and adapt to, of course, as well.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks for that insight, Matthew. It's about that time where I'd love to hear about your top 3 pearls. Now, this could be something from clinic, business, life, pretty open-ended here. For our audience, what would be your top 3 pearls?
Yeah, I think the first one, like you almost just mentioned, is adapt. You always want. Might be going back to one of my strengths being the learner, but I always feel like I need to be wanting to learn something different, and seeing that and implementing in your practice, I think, is really important. The next one that I had is, if you guys haven't seen the bracket placer that OrthoPly makes, I think the number is 0169-G. It's like a mix between an Explorer and a Scaler. I cannot live without this thing. But it's got a 3, 4, and 5 millimeter measurement tool, and it's basically a thick, rounded Explorer. So it's really firm.
That sounds awesome.
That's been awesome. That's the one when I teach at the university, they don't have them. I feel like I am using my offhand, or I feel like just blind, like going and bonding these cases because I'm so used to that measurement tool there. And the last thing, kind of going back to what I mentioned a little bit earlier, is accept and take those opportunities as they come up. When you're getting an opportunity that might be some time, but brings you in a different direction in life and opens up something that you might have not otherwise done, I think take those as they come. Actually, going back to the opportunities of getting involved with the textbook, we actually have the 7th edition of the Proffit textbook that's going to be coming out this spring sometime. Should be ready by the AAO meeting. Awesome. I helped write the 2 clear aligner chapters in there. We finally broke out the aligner stuff was kind of piecemeal into the braces cases. We've pulled that out and really developed 2 new full chapters there. So nice. I would have never thought that from the beginning. I'm sure you guys opening up another Facebook group when other things imploded at times, never thought of what this would evolve into with the meeting and the podcast and everything. But if you don't take the first steps, if you don't take the opportunities that come up, you're just stuck at where you always have been. So
I want to comment on that. One of my favorite lines is from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and that is that opportunities multiply as they are seized.
I love that.
One of my favorite lines. You know where I heard that line, Brian? I'd like to say I actually read Art of War, but do you know where I heard it?
The Way of the Superior Man.
It was not quite. It was in the Red Rising books.
Right on, man.
Yeah, Lysander said that. Remember when he and Cassian were being boarded basically by this warring faction. They have nowhere else to go, so they decide to just go with it, disguise themselves. And they're like, this is pure suicide to go into that ship. But they say, well, we just got to stay alive. Seize this opportunity. Opportunities multiply as they are seized. So
love that.
Very cool, guys. Well, hey, I want to thank Matthew for joining us today. This has been an awesome conversation. I always love chatting with you, Matthew. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks again to Brian and Chris for being here as always. Always love chatting with you guys. Again, a reminder, if you are enjoying this podcast, please do us a favor and subscribe. Tell your friends about it. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review. That can really help us out. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. Thanks for listening to us. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer, so be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.